I guess I'm live. And I'm going to grab a cup of coffee. I don't think anybody's going to show up to this live version of this event, but just in case, I'll be right back. All right. This is Wake Up America. This is Nicole, your host, and I'm going to upload this to my channel, Wake Up America, later on today. My dog's barking at me through the window. Bunny, that's enough. I'm going to shut the window. What are you doing? I know. Alright, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and crop this when I upload this to my channel, and I'll just take the excess recording off. Alright, let's see here. That is just going to have to work. Whoopsie. Alright, well, last week TJ Swank had written on my channel right when I was trying to upload... oh goodness, good thing this is going live on Unscripted because nobody can see it. Well, hello. Alright. Good old live going here. Some issue. My technical difficulties aren't really that technical because I don't have a very technical setup here. Yeah, that's good. Alright. Okay, so last week TJ Swank had asked me when I had uploaded the video about the snake, and it didn't really go up very well. In my comments, TJ Swank had asked me about Isaiah 45, when God talks about, you know, the light and the darkness and how he's in both. So I want to pull that up really quick. It's Isaiah 45, 7, I believe. Let me see if I can just find it in this Bible real quick. And we're going to go into what that's about. Actually, it's talking about the creation of time. Everybody's familiar with the theory of relativity, I'm thinking here. And the theory of relativity is like, if you're traveling, say like you're traveling behind light, as light's obviously traveling at the speed of light, and you're just going a little slower than it, time will radically slow down. But if you actually caught up with the light and traveled with the light inside your little spaceship, there would be no time. So if you're traveling at the speed of light, there's no time. So before God fashioned, created light and fashioned darkness, you could say that God was everywhere. But there was no time, right? So we're going to kind of get into that. It's kind of fascinating stuff, actually, because it's really talking about time is really the only way that you can be separated from someone, be reunited with them, develop a relationship. All these things are really interesting. Okay, here's Isaiah. It's my dog drinking water. Okay. All right. Okay, so TJ Swank's question last week was regarding Isaiah 45, verse 7. And this is God talking, and he says, I form the light. Hold on, let me get my dog real quick. I know. There's a lot of water outside. Let's go out there and drink the outside water for just a minute, because you're just so loud. Come on. Out we go. All right, this is not going to be for those who are just aren't ready to have their minds bent and twisted a little bit and doing somersaults and stretches and yoga moves with the brain. But so back to topic. Last week, TJ Swank had asked me about Isaiah 45, verse 7. And this is what it says there. And this is God talking. He says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So God is saying that he forms the light, and he's in the darkness, and he reveals himself out of darkness too. But that he also created evil. So let me just read that just one last time here, because it's kind of like I said, it's going to put you in some mental yoga. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Make peace and create evil. So, as I was saying, if you were, say, like as light travels and you're in a spaceship and you're following at the speed of light and you're just going just a little bit slower, time would slow down inside of your spaceship. If you actually caught up with the light and traveled at the speed of light, there would be no sense of time inside of your spaceship. You would actually be timeless. You'd be outside of time. So, first of all, and it says this in the Shema prayer too, that Jews pray every day, is that God created light and fashioned darkness. So when God created all of creation, when he did create the light and fashion the darkness, and God is in both of them, which is, like I said, it's a mind bender. That's when he created time. You know, you can't really separate light and darkness without creating time, because how does light travel? It has to travel in the darkness, right? So you have to separate light and darkness, and God is in both of them. He reveals himself in the darkness even. And so that's kind of where I'm going with this one. It's getting really a fascinating subject. Thank you, TJ Swank, for asking that question. And that's another thing. I mean, Christians kind of have this view of Satan as being awaiting this final punishment where he's going to burn forever and ever, and they're kind of forgetting that angels are a lot like animals. An animal in their pure state does exactly what it was created to do. An angel is a servant that does exactly what it was created to do. And for whatever reason, the one we call Satan was created to sort of be, in a way, kind of our enemy. We've got to remember, though, that our enemies are kind of our friends, because there's nobody who makes us achieve more than our enemies, right? I mean, even in Psalms, David says that God, that he's going to set a table for me in the presence of my enemies, which is a Jewish thing that people used to do, which is that they would once a year have a banquet and invite all of their enemies to, and have them come sit and eat with them, because you're thanking them. Because who does you the greatest service? Your enemies do. Because otherwise you don't strive to achieve more if you don't have any competition. So Satan is just doing his job. This Christian idea that he's our ultimate enemy, in reality, I mean, in the sense that without the enemy, we wouldn't strive to do any better, yeah, but the truth is probably we're a lot of times our own worst enemy. He's just doing his job. So, and that's kind of an interesting thing too, is that I believe that God created time so he could have a relationship with us, right? Because you can't have a relationship without time. So now I'm going to go into my notes here that I took this morning when I was thinking about what it was that TJ Swank brought up. So, creation of light was the beginning, and the creation of light and the fashioning of darkness was the beginning of time itself. And space also, and it talks about it, God created matter as well. Even space, so we're talking about time and space. Space ceases to exist apart from matter. We like to think of space as being ultimately infinite, but really you can only measure how infinite it is in relation to objects that are matter that's separated from other matter. And there's space in between. So when the matter stops, there's no more space either. So without light and darkness being separated, there's no time, and without matter, there's no space. So that's the creation of time and space. So I'm just going to give you guys my own little philosophy on this. If you want to, transcend ultimately, if you're here in this life, and I do believe in reincarnation, I believed in it actually. This is a tough one, because when I was a kid, actually, how reincarnation worked was actually revealed to me, and I understood it. And when I was a Christian, I never talked to anybody about it, because it was one of those things like people are going to think you're really evil if you bring that up in Christianity. But, God doesn't just give us one. It's not like a one-shot deal. I don't even know if you were trying to accomplish a lot and you had certain goals you wanted to achieve spiritually. I don't know if one human being could accomplish all of them in a lifetime. I mean, that would be pretty tricky. I think it takes, because you really only get so many roles that you operate in one life. You know, you might be a mother, you might be a daughter, or you might be a son or a father, but you're not going to be in every single role that there is. So how could you accomplish all that you were set out to accomplish? That's an interesting one because, too, you know, well, we'll talk about that stuff later. So if you want to transcend, you have to first accept that every moment that you've had leading up to this one exact moment, even if you think you made mistakes and stuff, the choices that you made were on purpose. And because I believe on some level, you're one with God. And this is where it gets even more tricky. In a sense, in the very beginning of creation, there was this chaos. And in the chaos, if light and darkness are not separated and each element is fully present, but none of them bows to anything else, there's no worship in chaos, right? You could almost say that's like a primordial God, right? But chaos, you know, fractured and shattered, and great souls shattered into little pieces, and we're those pieces, right? And even time itself and matter itself is the fragmenting of chaos into order, and time gives us order too. Like, you know, we wake up in the morning, we go to bed at night. There's seasons. We live on Earth. We're like the third planet out. We have 4 seasons, and we live in 5 dimensions. We live in it. It orders everything because the chaos of the way things primordially were, primordial God, shattered in order to create us and have a relationship with us, right? So I do believe that on some level we choose. And so when you look across all of eternity, you kind of, if you just accept that you chose this path you're on, and that's where you are for a reason. And you're, of course, uniquely you. But the path is reuniting with God. And people would say, like, what's the point of that? But that's kind of an age-old thing. I mean, if you look at Mark Twain, I believe, is talking about this too. But in the beginning where it says, like, it was this thing's breaking up. You know, it's, even that whole story is a story about, you know, love and longing and all of these things. But it really comes back to you have addition by subtraction, right? So how do you learn to worship? You have to be separated, right? You as a little piece of God have to be separated from God to be able to look sort of at God and worship God, right? It gets kind of, like I said, this is a tricky subject. I'm going to see if I can give it any kind of liberty here or, you know, justification. So I believe we're here on a path of kind of reuniting with God, right? And the other pieces of God, other people, other souls, all of that. So, and it is a mind-bending thing. But if you think of it this way too, it's a phenomena of being like in, right? Where all, God was one, and then out, shattered, lots of pieces all over. Then coming back in and being together again, right? And it's, I'm going to kind of explain that a little bit here, hopefully. So, complexity is kind of the nature of creation. Otherwise, we would just stay a seed, right? But a seed is simple, but ultimately has to relinquish its position and die and rot in the ground a bit to grow into a flower, to create some kind of new life. So it's like it's kind of like how the Christians believe in a Trinity, but it's more like, instead of separating God into 3 aspects and saying this is the Holy Spirit over here, and this is God the Father, and this is the Son, it's saying all these things, you know, we're supposed to unite God in our thinking, right? God already is one, but uniting in our thinking is accepting that, like, there's life and death and rebirth, and there's being whole and then being shattered and then being gathered back up. So how do you, if you were going to make a profit in a business, you would have to invest money, which means you'd have to liquidate some of your resources. You'd have to expend them. You'd have to spend them out, right, where you thought there would be a profit. And then later on, you gather them back up, but with more, right? So to get increase, you have to decrease. You have to break it up. So let's see. Okay, so humility allows us to transition from one state to another. If we just think that having everything and being, you know, uber rich is the ultimate way to be, then you would never transition out of that state. You're just kind of worshiping one state. And so you'd stay in a perpetual state of like being full. Or if you're poor and you think that it's really great to be poor, you just want to always be poor. Or a person who might worship sadness would always be sad. But see, we go from one state to another. We could be separate, and we can be whole. We can abound. We can be abased. We can be poor. We can be rich. There's kind of an embracing of each stage of life and understanding that they're all part of the big picture, if that makes sense. Honoring and worshiping the creator of everything kind of enables you to be able to transition from one state to another. Because if you think you're already in a perfected state, why would you ever transition? You wouldn't, right? If you just meditated to be in kind of a state of nothingness, there would be no point in transitioning from one thing to another. A seed becoming a flower, something simple becoming complex. There would be no point to all of life. When you worship God, you really are worshiping the one true God, because somehow we are in time, right? We're living and we're in time, and there's an order, and yet God is outside of time. Like it says that God created the light, but here's the tricky part. God himself is not just made of light. Remember, he said he's in the light and he's in the darkness. He's not just in one aspect of creation, he's in all of creation, which means every part of creation that we look at is examining and looking at another part of God. And if right. And there really is no humility in chaos, and therefore chaos was shattered, right? There's kind of this idea that the Jewish nation was created on Sinai, and the belief is that on Sinai, each individual Israelite soul had an encounter with God, where God revealed himself personally and spoke to that person out of the fire, which, if you believe in reincarnation, that soul that understands who God is never leaves you. So you'd be looking, no matter how many incarnations you've been through, you'd still be looking for God. And also, Israel is not all united right now. They maybe have two. Let's see, they have Benjamin and Levi, and they have Judah. They probably have little pieces of all the other tribes, but that's 3 out of 12. 3 out of 12 is only 1/4, which means they're kind of operating at 1/4 strength right now, in my opinion. And so there's all these souls throughout all the earth that, so to speak, belong to God, plus the mixed multitude who also cleaves to God. And some people would look at those 12 signs and say, like, oh, there's also 12 signs in the zodiac, there's 12 tribes. And that's also part of being revealed in creation, that different aspects of God are revealed in different people. And that's why you don't worship a person, because they have an aspect of God in them, but they're not the God, right? The one God. So the idea is that when we met God, we decided, because remember when Moses was up on the mountain and he was coming down with the tablets? After everybody had had this encounter with God, they end up worshiping the golden calf. And it seems so strange that they would do that right after having a personal revelation of who God was. I personally believe that when they met with God, God is outside of time. And for a moment, they stepped outside of time and they saw something from a completely different perspective. And the people who engaged in the worship of the golden calf actually wanted to have a bigger, how can I say this? They decided to take that seed, right, and unravel it into the matrix and have the full experience. And so full experience, though, means ups and downs and sorrow and joy and death and life and birth. It means going through the whole thing. Because otherwise, Moses would have actually been the Messiah right then, and everybody would have been redeemed. But on some level, when they met with God outside of time, they decided, because part of your consciousness is with God outside of time, and the conscious part of it is right here in your body. So they made a decision that they wanted to redeem more of the world, right? And we live on a lower level here on earth. And when we say things like, redeeming the world has to do with, we're bringing God down into this dimension and elevating the whole dimension that we live in. So the idea was that they decided to unravel the seed and create the matrix and make something complex, right? In order to gather more. And, you know, okay, so and that's, here's the idea in that. You can't thirst for God when you're in God, right? Think about it this way. Like if you've never been separated from the person you love or anybody that you love, if you think about it that way, you don't know what it's like to long for something, right? You have to be separated in order to long for something. You even have to be separated from God in order to worship God in a whole new way. It comes through that separation so that the longing to go back, right? And that longing only happens in this process of time that we're in, right? So the individual Israelites, I believe, that worship the golden calf said, we want to gather more. We want to, go into that matrix and unravel it and actually sort of learn what it is to long for something, which longing for something in and of itself, I mean, every great novel that's ever been written, takes you on a journey of longing, what it's like to feel that agony of longing. And then, to be reunited somewhere in the end. And sometimes it doesn't always resolve that way, but all of our books, if you look at our novels and our books as being sort of a peek into the human experience, all of them describe this process of longing, right? This separation. And you can't have longing without separation. And you also have a different type of worship when you've been separated from God. So us as God's creation and as being sparks of God that came down in this earth, it's through going into this lower plane, this lower dimension of being separated to where, we begin to long for God and worship God, right? In a more profound way. And to understand God more too, because when you're unraveled out into the matrix, you can see each aspect of God differently. You may see it in the way a mother taking care of their baby, or a father teaching their son. You may see it in the sunrise or in the sunset. And each aspect of creation reveals something about God to you, right? So let's see where we're going from here. So there's something clearly that's valuable in the experience of thirsting for something, hungering and thirsting. But how can you hunger and thirst if you've never gone without having something to drink or without having something to eat? I'm sure we remember, those of us who've read the Bible a lot, when David was in the cave with his men, and he wanted to have water from a well, from a town, and he was like, what I wouldn't give for this water, right? That's the experience of thirsting for something, right? Well, our souls, like the heart pants for the water, our souls long after God, right? And that's, I think, what's being described even in the New Testament when Joshua talks about, to the woman at the well, that you would thirst and always be able to be full. But the idea is you have to thirst before you can know what it's like to have your thirst quenched. So this is, to me, this is even like the aspect of, this may be a little too deep. I'll come back to that part in a minute if I'm still making the video. So the idea is there's something valuable in the thirsting and the longing, right? There's something beautiful in wanting, right? In wanting something and waiting for it. And all great novels are built on that concept, and there's timing too of wanting and the timing of when it happens. And so, and to long for something is to agonize. It's the concept of all great literature works and everything, music, art, and even in music, there's a dynamic tension that's brought about where music builds up tension and then it releases it. That when the tension builds up in music, it creates a longing in your brain for the resolution to happen. So you see that same pattern. There's something very beautiful that's uniquely expressed through the experience of longing for something, and the tension that's created there. So when there's an idea that if you only value possessing things and having things, then you almost worship that state. And if you could, you just stay in that state statically, right? Or maybe you think that there's something very noble about being poor and meek. And so then if you worship that state, you would just want to statically be in that state. But the state of life is to transition between those places, not just stay in one all the time. And that's also part of uniting, in my opinion, that's part of the uniting of our thoughts to love God, with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our might. So essentially, here we go. Let me see. Right. So as you begin to, this is where I say transcendence, as you begin to honor God in all of his creation and the different aspects of God, both light and darkness, right? Because God does reveal himself in the darkness as well. And I think that's what Solomon was talking about, because Solomon had, great wisdom, and he said that, there's a time to mourn, there's a time to rejoice, there's a time to embrace, there's a time to refrain from embracing, there's a time for everything, right? And you'll see this in Christian churches. When they announce that someone died, they'll say, but don't mourn for them, and they don't even often will actually act like the person who just lost their spouse shouldn't even be mourning, because you just know they're with God. It's just light. It's just light. No, if it's just light, you're not in time anymore, because the reason why we're in time is because light and darkness have been separated, right? Once again, if you're in that spaceship and you're traveling at the, you're approaching light, you're following light, and you're approaching the speed of light, time slows down. But when you catch up and you go at the speed of light and you're with the light, there's no time at all, right? So if God is only revealed in the light, or if you only go to the light, you're outside of time, right? You want to unite all these things on this realm back to God. That's light and darkness. That's seeing God in the light and seeing God in the darkness, right? And actually, it's a interesting thing. So this is the worship of God. When you unite your heart, your soul, your might to love God and to bring together and understand that God is one in all of these things. So in a sense, like getting trapped in a certain state and stagnating there, maybe like depression. People call those soul farms, actually, and I thought that was interesting. I heard a Jeffrey Doherty say that, and I know that that's not a new term to him, but abusive relationships are that way too, and it's really being trapped in a static state. But we're alive, so we're not meant to be trapped in a state. We're meant to transition, right? Which means I can be happy, and if something I may be sad later on, but that I'm not in a static state of being. I'm going back and forth. You going up to the mountaintop experience. As you go up, that's one experience, the hiking and the climbing. When you get to the top, you have the perspective you accomplish, but you don't stay at the top. You have to go back down into the valley again, back down into life, right? The descent. And each part of this it's part of creation. I believe we actually chose to be here and to be part of this. And so you can find God, so to speak, climbing up the mountain at the top, and actually as you descend. And part of the descent too is interacting with other people. When chaos, or the primordial God, is shattered, right? To gather back together, we're supposed to be, it's the increase by decrease, right? So let's see. Okay, so let's see if I can explain this. Increase by decrease. So there's something about, being together. If you think of it in terms of like maybe, so many books are written like this, but about like, say, a couple being together, the old story of romance, and then they're always separated, right? Then they're brought back together. There's something about that actually is greater than the original state. It's like repentance. Like if you go into sin and then you repent, you're actually in the repentance, you're actually in a more united state with God than you were before you actually sinned. And so that's also a different idea, a different take on the creation story, is that everything was already perfect in the Garden of Eden. How can you redeem anything? How can you bring an increase? You have to shatter it, then bring it back together. So hope I'm explaining that enough for you guys, but it's the idea of having something, then not having it, and then when you have it again, you have more. Having something perfect that's broken, and when it's repaired, it's actually in a better state, or a more of a state. So let's see. So for instance, like when you sin, maybe you might think like in that moment your love for God is weaker, but when you repent, It's actually greater than it was before you sinned, if that's a kind of a concept there. And I wrote down kind of the Fibonacci sequence here and wrote little notes that will be kind of hard for me to take and explain to you, but it's also, you know, you have to be in, together, out, shattered, then brought back together, regathered, returned, right? And then you have a new creation. You have something entirely new. And that's kind of the essence of life, is that there's creation constantly going on. All right, so I think I'm about done here. And I wrote this down too. You really can't fall unless you're first elevated. It's not a fall. If you're already low and you just stay low, there's no fall there. So you think of the fall of man as being elevated, then falling from heights, then coming back up, right? So it's a state of bringing about more. I hope that explains, you know, the concept pretty well. I have a friend, hopefully, that she's studying to get her doctorate, but she's actually a bit of an expert in immunizations. And on Tuesday, I plan on putting a video out on immunizations. So I thought I'd give you guys a heads up for that. And right, that's about it. And that's going to come out on Tuesday. Oh, guess that's not it. I have pages more of notes here. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah. I wrote this down as an afterthought from the concept that I was trying to portray here. Is that, you know, there's a saying that the person if you're a friend to everyone, you're a friend to no one, right? And the idea is that say a husband chooses his wife, right? Well, then by the nature of that choice, he's chosen to reject the other women in that way, right? So to choose one thing is to say yes to one thing, is to say no to other things, right? So if I said, you know, or if man said that he loved someone, but he had not withdrawn his love from somewhere else, then he didn't really choose that person. So it's kind of like the concept of that we're also given a choice here in this realm of being alive, right? There's good and evil. There's light and darkness. And you can't have a choice without time. You can't have a relationship with God or anybody else without time. You know, it's absolutely necessary. Therefore, God is in the light and God is also in the darkness. And in this process of being in time, we develop a relationship, a rapport, an interaction, which, you know, when everything was one, it couldn't interact with each other. It had to be separated and fragmented to interact and to bring about like a work of redemption or regathering. But because, you know, to be a friend to someone, if you're a friend to everyone, you're a friend to no one. In that sense, God's love for us means something, because he has to become finite to offer us something infinite. Like, so to offer us his love, he has to say, there's some things I don't love. And you clearly have a choice here of whether you want to be, you know. I hope this makes sense to all you guys. I know I said that a few things, but I've got a few times that I hope it makes sense. But it's because I'm in a hurry and I'm kind of going a little quick here. All right, so yeah, we can't choose God if we don't have the option of not choosing God. And two, I kind of think of this work of where we're at in time and creation and all of this. There's also a thing of where you take like an Italian dressing and you, right, and you shake it up. But when you put it back and you just set it down, it naturally, you know, some things rise to the top, some things sink to the bottom, and it naturally separates. Well, it's kind of like that with truth and God and life. You resonate with what you are, right? So by the nature of that, if you're aligned with light, you're going to, as things begin to settle here on earth, which is what I think is happening right now, those who are of the light will gravitate towards the light, and those who are of the darkness will gravitate more towards the darkness, right? It's a choice, because you're in time, you have to choose. If you were in chaos, you could be the light and the darkness and everything at once outside of time, but we're not. We're in time. So a choice is necessary. What you resonate with more. Do you resonate more with the truth or with the lie? And it's an interesting concept, but you are allowed to make a choice on some level. And that's as things get more, as this world, so to speak, gets darker and the people get more evil, people who choose right and people who choose goodness and mercy become more evident because they shine brighter in the darkness, right? The darker it is, you can't see the stars during the day. When we have our star, the sun, shining on us, we can't see all the other stars in the universe. By necessity, it must become dark for us to see all these stars out here, right? And the children of Abraham are like the stars, right? They're going to be that, it was promised they would be that multitude. Well, when do you see the stars? You see it in the darkness, right? And the time we're living in is dark. And as times get darker, those who are light will shine much brighter, right? All right, that's it for today. I hope that answered your question. TJ Swank, signing out.